practical, I'm going to spray down my work surface, so a light spray with the antibacterial cleaner. Leave it on for a few moments so that the chemicals have got time to work, and then you can give it wiped down with your dishcloth. They're usually pink, but some of them are white. We're going to be rolling out onto the work surface, so it's really important it's nice and clean. The next bit of preparation that I'm going to do is to pop the oven on. And the way that you do that on the gas oven is just switch it on at the wall, and then on this dial here, press the button in the middle, and then find the dial for the main oven, which is the one at the bottom. Press it in and turn it all the way around. You want it on about a gas mark 6. You'll know that it's lit when the light comes on, and you should be able to see a flame in the back, although it takes a little while to get going sometimes on the gas, but it will just self-ignite. On the electric ovens, they work slightly differently, and we want to turn the red switch on at the wall, press the button in the middle of the display again, and then this time the dial's on the right hand side for the main oven. So we're going to turn this one around, and then the light will come on indicating that it's not up to heat yet. As soon as that oven is up to the temperature you've set it to, which in this case is 180 degrees, that light will go out. And there should be some oven gloves for you to use hanging on the front of each oven. Okay, so next thing you need is your bowl out of your cupboard. I'm using a glass bowl so you can see through it. And then your small bowl goes onto the scales. Using the on-off 0 button, we're going to press that to turn on. And you want it to say 0 in grams. This doesn't, this is on pounds and ounces. So we're going to press the unit button until it says grams at the top, and then we're going to leave it. Next thing we're going to do then is to measure out the flour. The type of flour we're using is strong white flour for the cheese and tomato pizza. Okay. You'll notice that it's white in colour. It's had the fibre sieved out of it. And I haven't got quite enough, so I am going to top it up with some brown, and you'll see the difference in colour. When you come to make your own design pizza, you might like to use some wholemeal or brown flour because it's got more fibre in it. But it does give it a darker colour, which you may not like, but it is much better for you. So I've got 251 grams there. We're aiming for 250, plus or minus a couple of grams. And then we're just going to place that into our bowl. Next ingredient to go in then is some salt, and we're just going to put half a teaspoon of that in. We've got some in school, and remember when we're measuring spoons, it's level to the top of the spoon. And just give that a little stir in. Next ingredient to go in is some oil or butter. We're going to use 15 millilitres or 15 grams if you're using butter or margarine. That's the same as 1 tablespoon. I'm going to use a measuring spoon there to measure that in. You can use an olive oil or a vegetable oil, either of those are fine. And then you're just going to get your fingers in, and if you've got butter, it's going to be a bit chunkier, and you're going to rub the oil into the flour to coat the flour. Okay, next ingredient I'm going to add then is my yeast. It's a fast action or an easy bake yeast, which means that it's suitable for adding straight into the flour. And we're going to use a whole sachet of that. That produces carbon dioxide, which is going to help the dough to rise. So something I didn't mention about the flour is because it's a strong flour, it means that it's high in a protein called gluten, which when it gets wet, when we add the water in a minute, is going to make it elastic, and it's going to go stretchy, and it's going to roll out nicely. And then the yeast, it will produce the carbon dioxide, and it's going to make those air bubbles in that stretchy dough, and it's going to rise up and go nice and stretchy. So this is a bread base. Next, we're going to measure out our water. So I've put my jug onto the scales. It's measuring 31 grams because it's a different weight to the bowl. So I'm going to press on/off 0 and make sure it's starting on 0 and grams. And I'm going to use some warm water. So I filled the kettle up to I only did it halfway, but you can fill it up to the maximum mark with cold water from the tap. I didn't set it to boil all the way, so I turned it on, and before it boiled, when it was just warm, we're aiming for sort of bath water warm, I turned it off. If your water's boiling, it's going to destroy the yeast. And I'm using the scales for measuring because measuring small quantities of liquid accurately is quite difficult using the measuring jugs. I'm aiming for 150 millilitres. From experience, it's better to go a couple of millilitres over that, so between 150 and 155. If your dough is too wet, you can easily add a bit of extra flour, so it's worth bringing a bit extra in if you've got some. If it's too dry, it's really difficult to get extra water in later on. So that warm water is going to go into the bowl, and I'm going to take my wooden spoon and mix that together. I don't put my hands in first because they'll get covered in water and then covered in the dry flour and everything will stick. So we're just going to stir this until the dough forms into a ball. So all the dry ingredients are soaked in. Okay, so once it looks like this, we're going to turn it out onto the work surface. You can make some space at this point. Right, pop your bowl to one side. This is where it was important to have a nice clean work surface. And we're going to squeeze it to distribute all of the liquids evenly through the dough. You can feel in places it feels a bit dry, that's why bits are coming off, but inside it's quite wet. And it's just where it hasn't all mixed together yet. And my aim is to knead this until it becomes really nice and stretchy. You can see it sticking to my hands a little bit. I described the texture of it as being quite tacky. I want it to be sticky without sticking to the work surface or my hands and being unmanageable. The more moist it is, the more elastic that gluten's going to become and the stretchier the dough will be, and you'll find you'll be able to stretch your pizza and make it thinner and flatter. And I'm just kneading the dough, so I'm using the palm of my hand and just stretching it out. I'm just stretching those gluten, working them and developing the gluten. And we need to do this for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I've been kneading my dough for 10 minutes and I can see that it's nice and stretchy. When I pull it, it's not going to snap. And when I flatten it with my fingers, I can get it quite nice and thin. I could easily knead it for a bit longer than that and make it even more stretchy, but that's quite nice and soft and stretchy at the moment. So I've got myself a baking tray, and you should have some greaseproof paper. I'm just going to cut that so that it fits the size of the tray a bit more accurately. If it's too big for the tray, you can get a bit of overhang and it will start to catch sometimes in the back of the oven. That's just going to stop the pizza from sticking. Now, people like to use a rolling pin to roll their dough out. I usually start off with a rolling pin and quite often switch over just to using my fingers later on. So I'm going to start it off. If you start with a ball of dough, it usually stays in a circle a bit better. And if you press even pressure with both hands, it'll usually keep a more uniform shape. Obviously, we don't want to roll it any bigger than the baking tray, so I'm going to transfer it onto my tray now, and I'm going to finish off the shaping with it on the tray. And if your dough is really stretchy, it'll easily cover the whole tray, but I'm going to stop there, so it's not very interesting for you to watch. I've measured out 100 grams of passata in here. We'll see how we get on. We may not need quite all of it. This is just a sieved tomato. You could use fresh tomatoes sliced across the base. You could use some tomato puree, but if you do, you're going to need to add some water back into the tomato puree because it's too concentrated and it goes black in the oven. You can buy products like pizza topping, but really it's just tomato with some added herbs and seasoning. So I'm just going to add my own herbs to this passata. So I'm just going to take a pinch in my fingers and pinch it and sprinkle it over the base. Now you'll notice I left a little bit of a gap around the edge there, which is my crust. And that means that when we're eating the pizza, we've got something to hold on to, keep our fingers clean. The next thing I'm going to add on then is the cheese. Cheese is quite high in fat, very high in fat and also salt. So we need to be careful about how much we use. We need 75 grams in this instance. And this cheese has been grated already. It's a cheddar cheese, and mozzarella cheese is also suitable. Mozzarella is actually lower in fat. If you want to choose that, it's quite a good choice. If you are bringing in your cheese to grate yourself, it's using this side of the grater, and you would just place that down onto a plate or a chopping board and grate your cheese. Do make sure that you weigh it out though. Then we want an even sprinkling of the cheese over the pizza, so that every slice has got the same quantity. If you bring mozzarella that comes in a ball, in a packet in the liquid, you would just cut the top off of the packet, drain the liquid away, and then that would be either torn up and placed over the top or sprinkled. Placed on there. You sometimes see the little round discs of cheese, and that's mozzarella which has been sliced into discs. Okay, so that's all my cheese on. So next I'm going to place it into the oven. I'm going to take my oven gloves for this and hold carefully onto it. This paper will just slide straight off the tray if I'm not careful, so I need to be careful to grip both the tray and the paper. Many of people have dropped their pizza on the floor. And the rim of the tray is going to go into the back of the oven so the pizza doesn't slide off the back and into the flame. Now in a gas oven like this, the heat is going to rise to the top, so the top shelf will cook quicker than the bottom shelf. They'll take about 10 to 20 minutes. So as a starting point, I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes. So I press the button in the middle and then up to 10. If I was using an electric oven, they do have a fan in the back, so the heat gets moved around. The two shelves will be exactly the same temperature. I'm going to check this after 10 minutes, and if it's starting to brown quite a lot, then I'll pop it down onto the bottom shelf for another 5. Okay, so my 10-minute beep has gone off. I'm going to just open the oven now and have a little look at the pizza. I can see that the cheese is still quite white in there and not quite golden, so I'm going to set my timer for another 5 minutes. And have another look in. Another 5 minutes of cooking time's elapsed, and I can see that the pizza's nice and golden brown, and also that the crust is nice and firm around the outside, so it's not like a soft dough anymore. So I've carefully lifted that out using my oven gloves and placed it on top of the hob where it's nice and heat-proof, and I'm just going to turn my oven off on the dial and at the wall. There it is, cheese and tomato pizza.